We now complete our focus on the strategic models and turn our attention to the Milan systemic model. Let's go back into the workshop.
All right, so we're going to shift now to the Milan systemic model. And the Milan systemic model really, as I mentioned before, there's a signature article that Palazzoli and her team wrote. Do you remember what that was? Hypothesizing, circularity, and neutrality. Yes, hypothesizing, circularity, and neutrality. Okay? If you cannot remember anything about the Milan model, if you understand those three notions, you can kind of work your way backwards to get to it. Now, okay, they are hypothesizing, circularity, and neutrality. Okay. Now let's start with circularity because it's the piece that really stimulated the Milan model from their reading of, do you remember when? Or where they were, who they were paying attention to, who Palazzoli liked? Gregory Bateson and his notion of circularity from Steps from an Ecology of Mind. So what ended up happening was that they noticed that this concept of circularity, which is what? Can anyone describe what circularity is?
How interactions affect each other.
Okay. How interactions, how behavior between different people have a certain recursive or certain recursive elements to them that one begets the other. So circular causality is such that, let me draw that on the board, just a good little diagram. Well, let me give you just a straightforward way of understanding it first. Okay, so we have two different kinds of causality, don't we? We have linear and circular. Okay? So linear causality is A causes B, causes C, causes, right, and so forth. Okay? The domino effect, so to speak. Okay? Just a straight line, it's linear. Circular, okay, causality, might be B causes D causes a banana. That's a banana. Well, it looks like a C, though, doesn't it? Causes Z causes 6. Okay? That there isn't, and then 6 goes back to D, B goes to C, but they're all somehow affecting each other. Okay? Circular causality speaks to the fact that there are multiple levels of variables or realities that are coinciding, and it's really hard to just narrow it down to a single causal event. So, what we're trying to do is, in the Milan systemic model, is we're very interested, if we're Milan systemic therapists, we're very interested in the effect of circularity on what maintains the problem. So we've looked at, with MRI, the attempted solutions to the problem. Haley doesn't go far from that, does he? And sees that people's attempt at solving the problem is the problem. Okay? And now what are we doing? We're looking at what is keeping the problem in place. In a sense, what we're looking at is what is the circularity involved in what MRI would call the vicious cycle or the problem-maintaining sequence. But when I say vicious cycle, we jump back to MRI. Okay? So what I'm trying to do a little bit is to use jargon that forces you to have to jump laterally between models. Are you noticing that? So, because it's really important that you develop the ability to quickly shift on a lateral level from, okay, notion of circularity, vicious cycle, puts me over here with MRI. Circularity is true to Milan systemic. Problem-maintaining sequence might be Haley. You need to be able to move to how the different models focus on the same concept. Okay? Very, very helpful to do that. So this model is really looking at the notion of circularity, but they're most interested in what in terms of circularity? They're looking at circularity as it relates to how the symptom is maintained by every member of the system. By every member of the system. So we talked about the team. And again, this model emanated from Milan, Italy. And back when it came out, it was a little harder than even today to get from one place to another in Italy. So people would come from, might take them a whole day to travel for their therapy session. They might have to take 2 or 3 buses in order to get to the session. So the sessions were sort of spaced out over a long period of time. What ends up happening is that we have the Milan systemic folks all sort of at the very beginning, sort of taking the referral and generating a lot of information based on how that phone call comes in, and beginning the process of what? Hypothesizing. Okay? As they're hypothesizing, what ends up happening is that they are trying to generate what in their mind? A sense of what is keeping the symptom in place, the circularity of the system. The circularity that holds each member in some kind of a relationship with the symptom. Okay? Now, as I'm talking, my mind's sort of shifting over to the idea that, that's kind of interesting because I'm thinking right now somehow about the narrative model and how we're all sort of being influenced by the problem, that externalized problem. And sort of, in a sense, when we plan an escape meeting in the narrative model, aren't we also having them escape, in a sense, from the circularity of how the externalized problem is influencing each of them? We're doing something very similar. Okay? That's just a quick aside saying, again, here we can see a connection between models and where another model is taking something similar and adding something to it with the notion of storing and externalizing the problem. But we'll get to narrative in a second. This is a model that truly is looking to quickly come in and generate a very rapid form of change outside of the session. So if you remember the team, and if I had a board, I would put it back up, and I think I will because it'll make it easier. This is a model that is always going to use a team. And is it a therapy model? No, it's not. This is a meta-consultation model. And what ends up happening is that we have our family that calls. Well, actually, no. Would the family call or the therapist? Probably the therapist calling for a consultation. So the therapist calls, and the therapist is seeing this family. And let's say, just for the sake of an argument, that the therapy is calling because this family is having a problem, and the problem looks like this. Okay, a triangle with an X in the middle of it. That's the structure that's not working in the family. So what happens is a phone call comes over to the Milan team, and they start hearing the therapist talk about this problem. And what ends up happening is that with this problem, we're looking for, and they're listening for, remember what we called it? An isomorph that has repeated itself at the level of family and therapist. Because remember, isomorphs sort of work their way back up and sort of ripple back into the next level of system. So we're listening for that same problem to emerge here and here. Now, the team is hypothesizing, okay? So they're hypothesizing as to sort of what is then maintaining that problem in the family. That's the symptom that they're calling about. They come in to see the therapist, the Milan team, and the Milan team does what? They send in a co-therapy team of a male and a female, okay, to work with the family. Now, what is the treatment unit in the Milan model? The therapist and the family. So this now, oops, I'll get a different color. So this now becomes our treatment unit. What we expect is that this problem that has repeated itself is now going to probably repeat itself here, probably going to repeat itself on some level in here as well. Okay, that there's going to be a rippling effect of an isomorph, a structure that is somehow rippling through different levels of system, because this is now all part of a system. The team is then going to further, the co-therapy team is going to further interview to try to understand the circularity. Okay, so we hypothesize, and then we move to the circularity to try to come up with the circularity of what is maintaining the symptom in this system. And we are then going to continue to hypothesize and do what? We're going to generate a positive connotation. Okay? So we are now going to send in a positive connotation. And we're going to make sure that that positive connotation is directed at every, if there are, let's say there's a mother, a father, and 2 sons in this family, we're going to make sure that positive connotation is directed at every member of the treatment system. Okay, does everybody understand that? So we're going to actually positively reframe each member of the treatment system's role in keeping the symptom alive. And we're going to positively connote it, and we are going to do what? We're going to basically prescribe a no change. Okay, we're going to say, we're going to reframe it and say, don't change what you're doing. We're going to say to the mother, please do not stop nagging. But we wouldn't use the word nag. We would say, it's really important that your attention to John's not going to school remains exactly as vigilant as it has been, because it is that vigilance that you offer him daily, and in fact more than daily. It's that vigilance that winds up sort of keeping him aware of how much you love him. And Dad, you definitely do want to sort of keep some distance from Mom in this process, because she clearly understands that you respect her so much by not getting involved in this. Right? So if Dad's distant, but what we're doing is we're making sure that every member's behavior around whatever the problem is that they're bringing into us is being reframed in a positive notion. And in a sense, we're saying, don't change, don't change, don't change, don't change. And the therapist, we would say, and clearly, the way you have been working with this family, which is trying to highlight the very substantive differences, that you should continue to keep sort of framing things in such ways that the family is confused, because it's through that confusion that you're using or generating that the family is questioning or seeing the light. Again, the therapist would have a no change stance too. But the therapist becomes part of the treatment unit as well with this model, and it's really important. And then a few other very important components of this model is that you would really sort of oftentimes put in what's called the invariant prescription. Okay, and does anyone ever, maybe in your family or maybe in families have that person that's oftentimes like 35, 40, 45 years old that kind of never left home? You know how families sometimes have that one person that kind of never get away, either lives in the basement or, someplace. Sometimes families have that one person. And oftentimes the invariant prescription would be directed towards a family where there's somebody really stuck. And the invariant prescription is to try to do what? It's trying to address what they call in this model the dirty game. The dirty game. Okay? And does everybody remember what the dirty game is? The dirty game is really the secrets that family members have. Now, all families have secrets. And there are secrets that some subsystems know about, some subsystems don't know about, but all families have a dirty game going on. So what, in a sense, is the invariant prescription addressing? It's addressing the fact that it's okay to have information that different levels or subsystems aren't aware of. And what's it trying to do? Not dissimilar from what Haley does. It's trying to elevate what? The hierarchy. It's trying to reestablish some boundaries around the couple system, and in a sense saying, hey, you guys better get your own dirty game going on. In other words, you need to have some secrets too. So what happens? The invariant prescription is doing what? It says, anyone know how it goes? The invariant prescription ends up sort of saying to the parents, we want you to basically just disappear for 3 hours tomorrow and not tell anybody where you go. Next day, we want you to go away for about half a day. On Friday, we want you to go overnight, go get a hotel someplace. Don't tell anybody where you've gone. Now, obviously, you can't do this when there are young kids involved and no one's taking care of them. But it was done typically with older kids and families, or that quote-unquote young adult child that doesn't leave home. And so what's happening is that the invariant prescription is really addressing the element of a couple system that is not somehow maintaining the boundary around the couple system and reestablishing it in such a way that to the point where they actually go away, they tell them to go away for a week without telling the family where they've gone. Now, what happens to the family when all of a sudden the parents disappear? They have to reorganize. All of a sudden, well, Mom always cooked. Or we don't have any money. How are we going to do this? It forces the family to do what? To create a positive feedback loop and reorganize. So it's introducing a lot of new data or information into the family, and the family's having to reestablish a whole new order. It's generating some pretty severe discontinuous change. It's kind of like my blizzard, right? Where the family's having to all of a sudden rise to the occasion and do something different, and roles are going to change, and it's really disturbing or perturbing the status quo or homeostasis in the family.
So in that example, would you then maybe tell the parents not to mention to the kid about going to school, like to never say anything else about school, if that was what his problem was that he wasn't going to school?
No, you would tell the parents to continue to do the same.
Oh.
But the invariant prescription would be then to with the parents, with the kids not in the room, you might throw the kids out of the room and you'd say to the parents, okay, here's what we want you to do. Okay? So this would sort of be the stage one of it with the positive connotation. And then you would, after that would happen, you would go to the stage two of the Milan systemic, probably, where you'd use the invariant prescription. Now, sometimes you just would use an invariant prescription.
Okay.
But the invariant prescription is always addressed to the couple system, again, similar to Haley. And it's always addressed to having the couple create a secret that they're not going to tell the rest of the family. Now, in healthy families, those of us in couples, aren't there things that go on between us that we don't tell our kids? Definitely. And that's important to have those boundaries in place. A lot of the theory of dysfunction is that those boundaries have sort of become diffused, even though they wouldn't use the word boundaries, because boundaries, of course, is structural, Minuchin, okay? But that somehow these kinds of behaviors have been diffused, and the result is that this dirty game gets caught up where everything's stuck in these secrets that are going on. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to break through the dirty game. And we're doing it by sort of disrupting the behavioral sequences, okay? And by behavioral sequences, we mean sort of behaviors of different members of the family that speak to the circularity that the positive connotation is trying to get out. Okay, we're trying to address paradox, the positive connotation, basically prescribing it, saying do more of the same. The family's going to say, huh, that was a weird session. Why did the therapist tell me to continue to not go to school? That seemed weird. And they're going to wonder about it. And the therapist is going to say, gee, they said I should do the same thing, but I came in for a consultation, but they're telling me to do the same thing. So they're still, and what's key here is that all of these models, in a sense, MRI, J. Haley, Milan systemic, are all focusing on the fact that the attempted solution, in a sense, the homeostasis that's holding everything together, that's what's really the problem. We have to break that homeostasis, add positive feedback loops into the play, and those positive feedback loops have to do what? They have to generate new information. The family or the system has to get more complex and reorganize to deal with the new information coming in and somehow create a new reality based on that. Okay? So problems, according to this model, exist when a family is old. Isn't that a wonderful word, epistemology? When their old epistemology is no longer working for the current pattern of behavior. And again, these developmental shifts oftentimes have generated sort of old epistemology with new needs. And we have to rise to the occasion and take things to the point where we're able to easily sort of generate new behaviors, not easily, but we try to generate new behaviors where the family's reorganizing its belief system, the rules about behavior, the meaning of things in order to shift to that next developmental stage. So your theory of change with this model is to help the family develop that new epistemology. And you do it through perturbation. You're going to use interventions. You're going to use things that don't seem to make sense. I had a client once who he was a simple soul. He used to drive the Wise potato chip truck, and it was the craziest system where he'd have to buy the potato chips from Wise and then go sell them and then turn in his slips to get his money back. Okay, now this poor guy would lose his slips of. He'd end up. It would cost him money to work for Wise because he'd lose the slips of paper every day. Now, also in this family we had mom who was agoraphobic and afraid to leave the house. So we came up with an intervention. We're playing around with Milan Systemic, and so we were behind the team. And we said, okay, so here's the deal. The guy's first name was Warren. Still remember it. And we said, Warren, here's what you have to do. There's no way that that you're going to sort of be able to change everything without really bringing your wife in, to get your wife involved in this. And so now we'd like to sort of expand your business to be you and your wife. But he said, but she can't ride on the truck. They won't let her ride on the truck. I said, well, you're going to have to hide her on the truck. And we want you to take her on the truck with you. And I know you don't leave the house. You're going to have to sort of drive the truck up really close to the house so she can get in so nobody can see her. And she's going to sort of take care of all the slips sitting down really low in the truck and drive around for you and take care of everything because it's costing you money to work for Wise. They looked at each other and they said, that's the craziest thing we've ever heard. And we said, no, that's what we think you should do. And by the way, we are the experts. Remember, this is the most expert model. In the old days when we used to actually work from this model, we have one of those phones in the room that talk to the mirror behind the mirror. This is terrible, we used to pretend we were calling Milan, Italy. and we'd say, well, we happen to have the expert in Milan on the phone right now, and this is what they say to do. Right? And we did it with a straight face. Of course, it only went into the next room, and there was nothing to dial, but they believed us anyway. The point is, so this is the most expert model, and you use that expertise to really push and make sure that you're actually sort of going to be heard. And so what ended up happening was they did it for a day, and then she said, I'm not doing this, and she went out and got a job. So in a sense, what we did was we prescribed the symptom in a form or a variation of it, and we challenged the way they were approaching things. And then we worked with him on getting a clipboard so the things wouldn't blow out the window and generating just a straight behavioral way of addressing it. Okay, so therapy's brief. You see the entire family, including the therapist. There's a session interview. And you're really sort of looking at, again, trying to have the family understand their problem differently by adding a lot of new meaning and information inside of it. You're going to have a lot of discussion going on between the team and the co-therapy team. And the positive connotation or invariant prescription is just delivered and then the session's over. Okay? It's brief, but it's a meta consultation, not the most brief therapy. Yes?
Is there always an invariant prescription?
No. Only if it's called for. Because again, it's a little tricky and a little dangerous if it's not handled perfectly well and has the right sort of members of families that would facilitate that. Okay. Stance of the therapist, you're always using a team and a male-female co-therapist. Remember that male-female co-therapist, that's where our neutrality is addressed. So hypothesizing circularity and then the neutrality of the male-female co-therapist. Always, 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 always. This is, the invariant model, if you will. It's done the same way time and time again. Okay, and you're trying to focus on generating a different belief system or a different way to think. Hypothesizing circularity and neutrality. The invariant prescriptions, you might bring things into a ritual level. You would use rituals. You'd use paradox, and you would use positive connotation. Only positive connotation in this model. That's the key notion. Okay, a lot of what is talked about before the session is what sort of generates or what is the data from which the hypothesis is being generated from. And the hypotheses lead to what the therapeutic interventions are going to be around either the invariant prescription or the positive connotation. That's good. And we're in good shape right now for the Milan systemic, unless you have any questions about it.
In the next section of our virtual workshop, we will now move to the structural model and introduce the notion of a generic model of family therapy.